Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening, downloading, and subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm 12 Kyle. Check this out. On this podcast, we're going to talk about hip hop breakups. Now, we won't be talking about the breakup between Meek Mill and Nicki Minaj. Nor will we be talking about the breakup between Peppa and Tretch. We're going to talk a little bit about when some of your favorite groups or duos break up and how it kind of translates and affects us as fans. If you've been following the podcast, you know that I'm a huge hip hop fan. And, being a hip hop fan, sometimes you see things that you don't necessarily like or necessarily understand. And a lot of times it has to do with the acts or the people that you're really, really into. And what kind of brought this topic about was at the time of this recording, a few weeks ago, the hip hop group Little Brother had announced on social media their reunion. The rapper Big Pooh and Fonte getting back in the studio to do an album. Now, their third member, Ninth Wonder, will not be in the group per se, but I think it's safe to assume that Ninth Wonder will be producing a beat or two for the group. But he's not actually back in the group again. And they gave their reasons as to why, and, I respect it. Nonetheless, I was ecstatic to find out that Little Brother was, getting back together. And the reason being is that Little Brother, when they announced that they were breaking up, this was April 10th, 2010. And I remember it distinctly because it was announced on social media. And I remember seeing it on Twitter and I just didn't know what to think. And it wasn't like it was in some press release. I think it came from, Ninth Wonder tweeted it out, and I think Fonte tweeted it out. And, it was just that Little Brother, as we knew it, were breaking up. Now, for those of you listening, you may or may not know who Little Brother is, but that at the time they were one of my favorite hip hop groups. And that was the first time in history that I can remember seeing or hearing about a hip hop group or act breaking up and really kind of finding out about it in real time. And that's what the advent of technology and social media in particular has done, is that you get news and you get events in real time. So it got me to thinking as I was preparing to do this podcast about some of the hip hop breakups that I saw and, we as fans went through. And these are in no particular order, that really affected me. Groups that I hated to see break up. But nonetheless, they did. The first group that comes to mind for me would be that really kind of hit me was the Fugees. They broke up in 1997. If you follow the podcast, you know that I did a podcast. I did a breakdown of The Score, their Smash album. Did a 20-year review at the time of that recording. And it's an incredible album. One of my favorites from the 90s. And obviously it was their best album. But there would be no more Fugees after that album. And I remember hearing, I guess, second or third hand that the Fugees were breaking up. What was interesting was that for the longest time, even before they dropped The Score, there were rumblings that people felt like the girl should go solo. The girl meaning L Boogie, aka Lauryn Hill. So to some, it really wasn't much of a surprise that they decided to split. Honestly, at the time, we did not know the reason why as fans. Again, 1997, no social media. So we heard little rumblings here and there. There was an article or two printed, in, like the Source and the Vibe magazine. So it was stuff that was documented, but you really couldn't get a real good feel for what happened and why they went their separate ways. Well, we would later find out that Lauryn Hill and Wyclef, had a little something going on. And, subsequently, I think their breakup and Lauren's subsequent, relationship with Rohan Marley, the father of her, how many ever kids she has. I don't know how many kids she has. Sorry, I can't keep up. But nonetheless, that relationship and Lauren moving on to a new relationship actually ended the Fugees in a nutshell, from what we know. And even to this day, we really don't know a lot because Lauren really hasn't said a lot. And Wyclef he's been on interviews and he's said some things. But even in the information that he's released, he's been very particular and very, very peculiar about what he said, what he will say and what he won't say, I should say. Nonetheless, that was a blow, for a fan like myself who, really enjoyed the Fugees and really enjoyed their music. I loved Blunted on Reality. And I mentioned on the podcast that the Fugees almost got dropped from their label after they dropped that album Blunted on Reality, and then they came back and did the score, and of course that album went on to sell gazillion copies. Nonetheless, it was a huge blow because I felt like the three of them meshed between Wyclef, Prize, and Lauren. Now, honestly, yeah, Lauren's my favorite, and I've said that several times on this podcast. And, but I hated to see them end it as a group. And again, because we didn't have social media, we didn't know why it happened. But 1997, coming off the heels of, their smash album, Wyclef goes solo, Lauren goes solo, Pras goes solo. And of course, we know how it played out for everybody. Lauren dropped Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, and I mean, she's a superstar, Grammy Award winner. Wyclef dropped the Carnival, and I mean, he's through the roof as well. Prize did his thing as well. So, I guess it worked out to some degree, but and they've teased the idea over the previous years about reuniting, but it hasn't happened. I would like to see it happen, but at this point, if I can't get the Fugees, the real Fugees, then, honestly, I don't want to see them together. But I respect where they are, individually, as a group.
People who make the music, for me, it's transitional. It's expressing a moment. And the question is do I capture that and give that to the public, even though I may be past or beyond that moment? Does it still hold value? Is it still important for people, even though I may have evolved beyond, that particular moment?
So, yeah, that was one breakup. Another breakup that I didn't like, and, I it kind of hit a little bit for me. It really hit for me was the breakup of NWA. This was in 1991. If you follow NWA, Straight Outta Compton dropped in 88. Incredible album. One of the most pivotal albums, I think, in hip hop history. And, they're having the success. And if you follow Ice Cube or if you follow NWA, the timeline as far as how things happen. And, subsequently the success and, Ice Cube wasn't getting paid. And, he was like, look, Jerry's not paying us, meaning the late Jerry Heller, who's their manager. And, he went to Eazy and said, hey, man, we're getting jerked. And Eazy didn't want to believe it. And so Ice Cube went solo. And subsequently, with Cube going solo, that was huge really for us because while we had seen R&B groups, have members go solo. One person that always comes to mind is Bobby Brown going solo from New Edition. Although I will admit, as a fan, I did not know that Bobby Brown was kicked out of New Edition. because the way that the story was told to us as the fans was that he left and he went solo. Of course, we did not find out until years later that Bobby was actually voted out of New Edition. And subsequently, he dropped his solo album, or his second solo album, Don't Be Cruel, on the same day that New Edition dropped their album Heartbreak featuring Johnny Gill on the same day. But that's another story for another day. But nonetheless, so for me, it was different because I'm a huge Ice Cube fan. And, he's my favorite member in NWA. And to see him leave the group, that was tough. And then, honestly, because they had quote unquote beef, that made it even tougher for us fans because you really had to pick a side, right? You was either rocking with NWA or you was rocking with Ice Cube. You really couldn't kind of play in the middle. And I enjoy both of them. But when they dropped 100 Miles and Running and they were dissing Ice Cube on that album, you just didn't know really what to say. And Cube actually, when he went solo, he didn't have a lot to say about them. He was just doing his own thing. And of course, Ice Cube drops No Vaseline. In my opinion, the greatest diss record in hip hop history. And subsequently, NWA never responds. And, to be honest, that kind of killed NWA. They kind of wisened up and Dre went his solo way and Ren went his solo way. And that was it. That was it for NWA. So, Ice Cube leaving was a part of a breakup. And then, the group actually disbanded, not long after Ice Cube left, a few years later. After they realized they weren't getting the money. And all of this is well documented in the movie Straight Outta Compton. But yeah, man, that as a fan, that sucked. I'm not even gonna lie, that really sucked. Another breakup that sucked, at least for me it did, 1992. Eric B. and Rakim. That was tough, man. If you follow me, you know that I feel like Rakim is the greatest lyricist to ever pick up a microphone. And Eric B. and Rakim together, I mean, it's like peanut butter and jelly. Like they just go, they go together, man. You can't have one separate from the other. And it was interesting because, again, this is 1992. We got very little information about the fact that they were splitting. They had just released Don't Sweat the Technique, the album, an album that I really didn't care for. As big a fan as I am, I really didn't care for it. If I had time to talk, I'd tell you about why I didn't like that album. Nonetheless, it was, they decided to go their separate ways, and, it was business. And allegedly, there was a deal for Eric B to do a solo album and a deal for Rakim to do a solo album, and they were supposed to sign the contracts. And Eric B didn't want to get left holding the bag, if you will. And I don't think he signed his contract. And a lot of stuff got tied up in legal mumbo jumbo, and they split up, and they really weren't kicking it for a while. And for the better part of 10 years, may have been longer than that. And what was interesting was that, Rakim went on to produce and make more albums. And even on the albums that don't feature Eric B, you could kind of tell that something was missing. And it wasn't anything lyrically. One of the complaints that I think a lot of us fans had was that lyrically Rakim he was never better. He was just as good as he was in the past. But what was missing was those beats, those scratches, those cuts, and everything that we kind of had grown to appreciate with Eric B. and Rakim. They were no longer there. So, we kind of, as fans, we were left with nothing really, because I bought all of Rakim's solo albums. But again, it just felt like something was missing. And I mean, it's kind of hard to explain, but they were dope albums, but something was missing. And subsequently, Eric B. and Rakim did reunite a couple of years ago. They are now currently on tour at the time of this recording. And while I don't know that they have any plans to make a new album, honestly, they could live off their touring. They're just that good. They have just that much material. And quite frankly, they're just that popular. So if you get a chance to see them, please do. I saw them in concert, man. It was incredible. It was incredible. I loved every minute of it. So yeah, that was another breakup. One other breakup that comes to mind. Actually, there are two other breakups that come to mind. The first one, man, this one crushed me, man. This one crushed me like a ton of bricks.
This is WDEF Radio. Big Search here with some important news. Russell Simmons just called me to let me know. It's official. EPMD broke up.
Yeah. EPMD. It was crazy, man, because when we found out about EPMD, it was just like that. It was on the radio. It wasn't something where you could click online and find out, Eric is dissing Parrish or Parrish is dissing Eric or Def Squad is dissing the Hit Squad. I mean, like, it was weird, man. It was weird.
Hello?
E, baby! E!
Yo, what's up, Russ?
Come on, man. I need an EPMD record.
Let him call here without, but you know I ain't doing no EPMD record. Nigga tripping, man. You bugging.
Just come to the club, man, for a minute. Just come to the club.
Yo, Russ, man, that's out of the question, B. I ain't mean it happening.
And their breakup happened in 1993. It was really controversial. I mean, just to give you a backstory, in late 1991, somebody actually broke into Parrish Smith's house, right? Burglarized his crib and armed intruders. So they got guns and everything. And allegedly, when the cops caught the perpetrators, one of them supposedly had given up Eric Sermon as saying that he paid them to break in his crib. And so Eric Sermon was arrested for a plot to, assault Parrish Smith. Now, they later dropped the charges, no charges were ever filed, but he was initially arrested for it. And so now you have a situation where you have not just a group that is broken up, but you paid somebody to run up in my spot and rob me? Come on, bro. You got guns. You hire people to take me out? Nah, we not doing that. And so that was messy. Again, he went to court and case was dropped or whatever the case may be. But that was tough because, again, Eric Sermon had, a ton of success with Parrish Smith. And I mean, for me, just on a personal note, EPMD's first album, Strictly Business, came out in 1988, the greatest year in hip hop. And I mean, like, it's kind of hard to explain, but like, I really took to that group like I was a member. I mean, like, those dudes were so cool. And like, one of the things that I always appreciated about them was that, at least for kids my age, you could relate to them. They were cool and they made you want to be like them. And so, everybody from my town, all my friends and stuff, we loved EPMD. And to be honest, I don't know many hip hop heads from that era that don't like EPMD. In fact, I'll take it a step further. I don't know many hip hop heads from that era that don't love EPMD, because we all love EPMD. And to me, EPMD is one of the greatest hip hop groups of all time, hands down. And so for them to break up and, you have Hit Squad going this way, Def Squad going that way, Hit Squad was, Parrish's faction of his rappers, and Def Squad was Eric Sermon's. And, Eric Sermon went his separate ways and, had a lot of success with the Def Squad and Keith Murray and, Redman and doing production and the whole nine. And, Parrish Smith had success in his own right as well. With his solo album and the Hit Squad label. And, so they both kind of did their thing, individually. But, it was almost like a line in the sand was drawn, for us as fans. You either had to choose Eric Sermon or you had to choose Parrish Smith. And that's tough because we always saw them two together. So we just didn't know, if it would ever be. And lo and behold, 1997, they're back. And they've been back together ever since, man. And I mean, as a huge fan of EPMD, it feels good to see them back together. Got a chance to see them on stage. And they tore it down, man, just like you would expect EPMD to tear it down. And there are talks, and from what I'm hearing, that at the time of this recording, there should be an album by the end of this calendar year, which I think would be incredibly dope. And I'm definitely going to cop it because I always buy EPMD albums. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't touch and go, because it's one thing to break up. It's another thing to have somebody come up in your crib, with guns, robbing you. That's something totally different. And that's taking it to a level that, most of us can't even understand or comprehend. So, to have that happen and then for them to, squash their differences and get back together, I think that's a beautiful thing. The last breakup, and this one hit me really hard, man. A Tribe Called Quest, back in 1998. Looking back on it, I think as a fan, you guys know it, Tribe is one of my favorite hip hop groups of all time. I think, Low End Theory and Midnight Marauders, two of the most phenomenal back-to-back albums ever. You heard the podcast with me and my boy Eclectic on here. Yeah, man. So Tribe breaking up, that hurt. That hurt just like EPMD. I mean, like, those two breakups probably hurt me the most as a fan, because I literally grew up on Tribe's music. So in a weird way, like, most Tribe fans feel like they're a member of the group because the name says it. It's a Tribe Called Quest. We're a part of the tribe, we're part of the native tongue as fans. And a lot of this was documented in the documentary Beats, Rhymes, and Life that was directed by Michael Rappaport. And if you saw that documentary, you saw Q-Tip look like an ass. And I don't necessarily know that Q-Tip is an ass, but he really looked like an ass, as far as like how, he and Phife fell out. And, unfortunately, rest in peace, Phife is no longer with us. But that one was tough, man. And I mean, I think, of course, nobody knew that Phife's health would, succumb to the diabetes that he dealt with most of his adult life. But it was just tough, man, because as fans, you wanted so much for it to happen. But looking back on it, you could kind of see how they got to that point. I mean, like, you had the first album, which was incredible. You had the second album, Low End Theory. Then you had the third album, Midnight Marauders, which is my personal favorite. But then you had Beats, Rhymes, and Life. And I think that album was the turning point. Phife really wasn't featured on it that much. All of a sudden you had Consequence, who just really came out of nowhere and who happens to be Q-Tip's cousin. And again, we didn't have social media, so you pick up, Beats, Rhymes, and Life, and you start playing it, and all of a sudden you hear this guy rapping, and it's not Fife, it's not Q-Tip, it's not Jerobi, and damn sure ain't Ali Shaheed Muhammad. It's Consequence. And there's no explanation as to why Consequence is on 5 or 6 tracks, and Fife is on like 3. And I did a podcast on that particular album when it turned 20 years old. You can go back and check that out after you listen to this podcast. But yeah, it was weird. And so again, if you look at the documentary and you look at how things were, you really shouldn't be surprised that Tribe broke up when they did. So they do that Beats, Rhymes, and Life album. And then the last album that they did collectively, while Fife was alive, was The Love Movement. And for as dope as I think some of the production is on Love Movement, which was done by the late, great Jay Dilla, shout out to JD. The production was crazy, but lyrically it just wasn't there. And I think Fife had admitted to it that, they kind of mailed it in. And it sounds like they kind of mailed it in. So, when you have a situation like that where you're not really putting forth your best effort, it's going to sound like it. And the one thing I say about the Love Movement album is that JD's brilliance couldn't save this album. And it really should have, but it couldn't, because Tribe didn't have the same hunger. They sounded like dudes who just put an album together just because they had a contractual agreement to do so. And that was tough, and it sucked for us as fans. And of course, Q-Tip went solo, did his solo album. Fife went solo, had a couple of solo joints, and they toured. So they did get back together to tour, but we never saw another Tribe album, until Thank You For Your Service. We Got It From Here. But that album was in production, or may have been in post-production, when Fife, passed away. And I think that's a great album. But as fans, we still didn't get a chance to see them collectively back together. You saw them on tour, but it wasn't the same. And I think, so many things changed, and, fans, and honestly, if you know what a fan who is a Tribe Called Quest fan, if you ask them, some will blame Fife for the breakup. Some will blame Q-Tip. In the documentary, like I said, I think the documentary doesn't necessarily paint a perfect picture of Q-Tip. I think it actually makes Q-Tip look like an asshole. And Fife had his asshole moments in the documentary as well, but I'll let you guys decide, if you haven't seen it. Nonetheless, it was tough for us as fans because, again, we saw them tour, but I think they could have been touring just out of necessity. And they still have a strong brand. Unfortunately, with Fife being gone, we'll never get another A Tribe Called Quest album. And that sucks. And sometimes when people and groups break up, it's for the best. Other times it's not for the best. It's for individual reasons. It's for selfish reasons. Unfortunately, the public, the fans, we lose out. And some of those breakups that I talked about on the podcast, we lost a lot of music. We lost a lot of opportunity to celebrate them while they were actually here and doing their music. So it's a little bit bittersweet. When you listen to Fife and you hear him on, Low End Theory or Midnight Marauders, he don't sound like the same Fife on the Love Movement. And, sometimes that's how it happens when you're breaking up. Everything around you is breaking up. And if we had paid attention, we probably could have seen the breakup coming. Sometimes it's not as clear as you might think it is. Nonetheless, as hip hop fans, we've experienced a lot of breakups and a lot with these groups. As I mentioned at the top, we don't really have a lot of groups. So I guess the flip side of it is that you don't really have to deal with much breakup going forward because, everybody's kind of an individual now, kind of going for their own thing. Again, you got crews, but, it's not the same. Nonetheless, I mean, those are some hip hop breakups. You tell me some of yours. Thanks again for checking out the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5,000.